This is Dr. Rodriguez. It's Psych 101, Chapter 3, Part C. We're going to return to talking about the central nervous system for a minute to go over the different brain parts. So let's start off with talking about the forebrain. It's the newest part of our brain to evolve. It is responsible for higher level processing. So the forebrain includes this cerebral cortex. It's those folds and those bumps. It's the part of the brain that we often will see being dissected. It's like that pinky white. So it's that surface, all those folds and those bumps. And the cerebral cortex is the upmost part of our brain. So the way that I remember cerebral cortex, I see the text in there. So I think about this like Texas cowboy hat sitting on top of our head, you know, and that it would be sitting, when you have a hat, it's sitting right on top of that cortex. So cerebral cortex. You see Texas there, you think about a hat on the head, you know, like cowboys in Texas, right? So you have that hat on the head, you know, and maybe imagine it with the formula E equals MC squared sitting on top of it. And it'll help you just to remember that complex thinking. So cortex, think about a hat sitting on it, is that outermost part of our brain, and it's responsible for a higher thinking, complex thinking. Now, the cerebral cortex, you have two sides. It's two-sided, two hemispheres. The left side controls your right side of your body. So when you're writing with your right hand, it's your left side of your brain that is controlling that. So the left is thought, or at least in the past, was thought to be our more logical side of our brain, more language focus. Some more modern research says, no, that's not so much how it is. Both sides can pretty much do, you know, any different function, but you might see some research referring to the left side of our brain being more logical, more language, more positive emotions. And our right side controls our left side of our body. So if you're left-handed, your right side of your brain is controlling that. And the right side tends to be less of the logic, more of the creativity, more of the negative emotions, according to some research. Okay, so your cerebral cortex is that folds and the bumps. It's the surface, the highest most part of your brain where your hat sits on, right? A Texas, you know, cowboy hat sitting on. You have it's two-sided, two hemispheres. The left hemisphere controls your right side, and your right side controls your left side. And the two hemispheres, the two sides, are connected by the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. It's these axons that connect these hemispheres, allows communication between these hemispheres. So whenever I see the corpus callosum, I see the word call someone, like callosum, call someone. You know, it sounds a little like it, callosum, call someone. And it makes me think about, okay, you can, maybe your left side of your brain is calling your right side. It connects these two sides. It allows communication like a telephone. Corpus callosum. The corpus callosum allows these two parts of your brains to call to the other, to speak to communicate with the other side. Corpus callosum allows the communication between the two hemispheres. All right, so each side, so you have, you know, your left side, you have your right side. Each of these sides is divided into 4 different parts. So each side is divided into 4 parts, 4 lobes. The frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex is your reasoning, is your personality, is your language. And one of these, or there's a part on the frontal lobe that is your Broca's area. Broca's area, and that's for language production. If your Broca's area gets damaged, you cannot produce language. So when I see Broca, I'm like, okay, how am I going to remember that? I think, oh, if your Broca's area is damaged, you can't say bro, Broca, bro. You can't say bro, all right? And that will help you to remember, okay, Broca, oh, I can't say bro. So it's language production. All right, so the frontal lobe is all about reasoning, language, personality. Now, Phineas Gage was worked on the railroad. He had an accident where a rod went through through his eye, through his frontal lobe. Okay, through his eye and through the frontal lobe. Now, when that happened, the rod went through his eye, went through his brain. Phineas Gage stood up and was conscious and was able to, walk around and went and saw the doctor. It was like, okay, you seem fine. And then Phineas coughed and out came a huge part. Well, not a huge, but came like a handful part of his brain. All right. And so that part of his brain was from his frontal lobe where the damage happened. And although he was conscious and walking around, what we figured out is that frontal lobe and that material, that part of his brain that he coughed up, it was really important because it changed his personality. That damage to that part of his brain changed who he was. He was an easygoing guy that was successful at his job beforehand. And after that rod went through his frontal lobe and damaged it, Phineas Gage started acting, so different. He swore a lot. He was really, grumpy, and he ended up losing his job. His marriage fell apart. So his personality changed. And so later we were able to, determine that this frontal lobe plays a very big role in personality. So frontal is your personality. It's your reasoning. It's your decision making. Sometimes we'll hear about your prefrontal cortex, right? Prefrontal cortex, and that's your personality, your decision making. That's the part of our brain that doesn't fully develop until our mid to later 20s. All right. And in teenagers, their frontal lobe isn't fully developed, and that's why they kind of make risky decisions. They make more emotional rather than logical decisions because their frontal lobe, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. All right. So then another part is called the parietal lobe. Parietal. So it's behind the frontal lobe, and this part of your brain processes information from the senses. So it processes when you touch something. It processes temperature, outside temperature. It processes pain. So when I look at parietal, when I see the word parietal, I think it kind of looks like parent, right? Parent. So I think about how parents say, don't touch that. Put your coat on so you don't get cold. Stop doing that so you don't get hurt. So I think about all the things that parents say. Don't touch. Don't get a cold. Don't get hurt, right? And so it'll help me remember parietal, looks like parent. It'll help me to remember all these things that they say, touch, temperature, pain, don't touch, don't get cold, don't get hurt. And it'll help me to remember that parietal lobe. The temporal, so think about your temples. Imagine me rubbing my temples right now, okay? That's where your temporal lobes are, is right kind of the sides of your head. And imagine me rubbing my temples and going, oh, it's so noisy, I have a headache, all right? And your temporal lobe, it processes hearing. All right. And there's a part on the parietal lobe called the Wernicke's area. And that is responsible for comprehending and understanding language. All right. Hearing that language, comprehending it, and processing it. So when I see Wernicke, how do I want to remember that? I remember, Broca's. I remember, oh, okay, if I don't have my Broca's, I can't say bro. I can't produce language. Wernicke, I look at that and I think, Wernicke. Oh, I'm worried about Nick because he doesn't seem to understand this lesson. Wernicke. I'm worried about Nick. Wernicke. He doesn't seem to understand. He just doesn't seem to comprehend or understand what I'm saying. Worried about Nick because he doesn't understand. So the temporal lobe is all about hearing and processing language. Wernicke, I'm worried about Nick. If your Wernicke area is damaged, have a difficulty with comprehension and understanding language. All right. So the occipital lobe is way in the back of your head. And this is your visual cortex. It's not in the front of your head. It's your way in the back. So think about how maybe you're skating and you fall back and you hit your head and you see stars, right? Have you ever, I'm seeing stars. That happens because you have hit your occipital lobe. That's the part of your brain that is your visual cortex. It processes sight. So when I say occipital, okay, so I think of binoculars. You put on binoculars so that you can see. So that's how I remember the occipital is for seeing. Binoculars. It's all about seeing, okay? So if you damage your occipital lobe, you're going to have a hard time with seeing. Okay, so that was our forebrain, the top part of our brain. Some other parts is the thalamus, and this is the part of your brain that processes sensory, just processes information coming from your senses and tells those messages where they need to go. So thalamus, whenever I see thalamus, I kind of see the names Hal and Amos. So I imagine these police officers named Hal and Amos directing the messages that come into our brain and telling them, you go over here, you go over here. Thalamus, here's Hal and Amos. They're relaying the information. They're telling the information where it needs to go. All right. So whenever I see thalamus, I think of Hal and Amos directing our brain's messages, our brain track. All right. The limbic system. It's different parts of that involve your amygdala. Here's your amygdala right there. And whenever I see amygdala, I see the name Amy. And whenever I think of Amy, I think about this girl that I was going to school with in high school. Her name was Amy, and she was a bully. And I'd be standing at my locker, and I remember Amy walking by, and I'm thinking, oh, please don't mess with me. She was, she just picked on everybody, and she was just a mean bully. And so Amy was just a jerk. And whenever I would see her, I would get scared of her, all right? So every time I see the name amygdala, I think of mean Amy and how she always made me so scared. So amygdala, Amy, very fearful. That's the part of your brain that regulates fear, emotions. Okay, another part of your forebrain. We talked about the cerebral cortex, that top layer, the corpus callosum that connects those your two hemispheres of your cortex. Thalamus, Hal and Amos, that's where your messages get directed. Amygdala is your fear, right? Your fear, emotional part of your brain. Hippocampus is the part of your forebrain that is responsible for memories. With the hippocampus, I think about how the hippo would get lost on campus if it didn't have its hippocampus, all right? So think about a hippo walking around on campus, and it would be lost if it didn't have its hippocampus. Hippocampus is about memory, learning. Another part of the forebrain is the hypothalamus. This part of your brain is, it cools the body, it regulates body temperature, regulates thirst, hunger. And so when I look at hypothalamus, hypothalamus, I think of hypothalamus. So a hypodermic needle. I imagine a hypodermic needle having water in it, and I'm spraying this hypodermic needle at the llamas and saying, drink this, or putting food into this hypodermic needle and saying, hurry, eat this, you're hungry. Or putting cold water, and squirting these llamas with this hypodermic needle to cool it down. All right, so this hypodermic needle filled with either water, so these llamas aren't thirsty, or cold, cold ice-ish water, so it can cool them down, or filling this hypodermic needle with food so that the llamas are no longer hungry. And that amygdala, the fear part, the hypothalamus, the body temperature, blood, appetite, Hypothalamus is also sexual stuff too. And hippocampus are all part of the limbic system, part of the forebrain.